Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Classic Comics Trek Talk live stream. So, this week, taking a look at Balance of Terror. This is. Oh, hello. Hello, Lord Thoth. Thank you for stopping by, sir. Always a pleasure to see you. Yeah, this is a classic, no doubt about it. One of Star Trek's most iconic episodes. This is Balance of Terror, which was I believe, the eighth episode filmed. And of course, it's also a very important episode because we get our introduction to the Romulans, the neutral zone. We also get some background for the first time on the Star Trek universe. So, as always, I'll be reading from Mark Cushman's book. These are the voyages. But first, let's just go ahead and take a look at the episode itself. So we begin with a wedding, and first, before the wedding, Kirk receives a message from Spock about some outposts along the neutral zone that have been destroyed. Outpost 2 is not responding. And now Outpost 3 has gone silent as well, and Kirk says to keep him updated. So the wedding is between Lieutenant Tomlinson and Ensign Martine, but the wedding is interrupted as the ship goes to red alert. And Spock tells Kirk that Outpost 4 is now under attack by an unknown vessel, and Kirk orders battle stations. Now, on the bridge, Kirk and Spock inform the crew of the situation. And first, we get this image showing the neutral zone for the first time as Spock relates the history of the Romulan War. Again, this is the first time we're getting any of this information. And the creation of the neutral zone as well, noting that back then there was no face to face communication and humans and Romulans have never actually seen each other. The helmsman, Lieutenant Stiles, argues that it must be the Romulans attacking, noting that their ships will have an image of a bird of prey on them. He also reveals that he had several ancestors who fought in the Romulan War. Kirk orders the weapons charged, and this is the first time we see the phaser control room and some of the inner workings of the ship. And this is, it's interesting. It's obviously this was done to kind of mimic the workings of the weapon systems on a submarine, because obviously a lot of this is taken from the film The Enemy Below, which was a submarine movie. And really, the way they use the phasers in this episode, they're basically using the photon torpedoes, really, but I don't think had come up with the concept of photon torpedoes yet, so they call them phasers, even though that's how they operate is really more like the photon torpedoes, because you see these sort of projectiles instead of the phaser beams that you would normally see. Now, Tomlinson and Martine both work in the phaser control room, and they lament that their wedding was interrupted. And then their Enterprise receives a message from Commander Hansen of Outpost 4, who tells them that Outposts 2, 3, and 8 are gone, destroyed by a powerful weapon, which echoes the readings that Spock has received. And Hansen says that the weapon overwhelmed their shields, and they're now helpless. And another attack is likely to destroy them. Hansen then brings up the intruder on the Enterprise view screen. Well, first actually shows his own outpost, which is in ruins. He then connects the Enterprise with his view screen, showing a ship. Here we go, which appears and fires on the outpost. and it subsequently destroys the outpost before disappearing again. They then try to locate the vessel, and while they can't see it, they are able to detect a moving object back towards the neutral zone along a path which suggests the intruder can't really see the Enterprise either. Kirk speculates that their invisibility field works both ways due to the high level of power consumption it requires. Kirk orders a parallel course to the intruder to appear as a sensor echo rather than attacking. Stiles questions this and suggests that they may be Romulan spies. There may be Romulan spies on board the ship or on board the Enterprise. Sulu agrees and suggests that the Enterprise remain at security alert, which Kirk agrees to. Uhura then picks up a signal, which is coming from the intruder, and Spock is able to lock onto it and give the Enterprise a view inside the alien ship. Then, in one of Star Trek's more famous moments, we see the crew of the other ship, and we discover for the first time that the Vulcans look just like Vulcans. This leaves the crew regarding Spock with some mistrust. And I love this scene when Styles looks at the screen and back at Spock like, what a what? And then, and then we get this scene where the whole bridge crew is pretty much giving Spock the stink eye. He's kind of like, who, me? Let's see. Then there is the part where uh, Uhura intercepts a message, and it's encrypted. And then Styles suggests, well, maybe you ought to let Spock try and take a look at it. And Kirk says, well, I assume you're complimenting Spock on his ability to decode. And Styles is like, yeah, not so much. The Enterprise then trails the ship, matching its movements. Now, on the Romulan ship, one of the crew disengages the cloaking device, arguing that the ship following them is a sensor reflection. But the Romulan commander suspects otherwise and orders the cloak reestablished. The Romulan commander demotes one of his officers for breaking radio silence, and his first officer warns him that the officer in question, Decius, has powerful friends who could make life difficult for the commander. The commander laments that their actions will likely start another war, saying that he's tired of war and death. On the Enterprise, they've collected some of the debris from the outpost, and Kirk holds a staff meeting. Here we go. To discuss recent events. Spock notes that the difficulty of fighting them since their weaponry appears to be superior and they have an invisibility screen. Bones warns that what they do next could start a war which could kill millions. Kirk asks if they could attack the Romulans and have a chance of winning. And Scotty notes that they only have impulse drive and don't seem to have warp, which makes the Enterprise much faster. Styles then argues that they really need to attack because failing will only embolden the Romulans to return in greater numbers. Kind of like sand people, I guess, and demands to know why Spock knows so much about them. Now, surprisingly, oh, hold on, I need to bring this up. Okay, surprisingly, Spock agrees with Styles, saying that they can't let the Romulan ships just return home, and it's really imperative that they attack. We then get some of our first background on the Vulcans as we learn they were quite warlike in their past before embracing logic, and that the Romulans are likely an offshoot of the Vulcans. And Spock warns that they dare not show weakness and must destroy them before they return home. Uhura then tells them that the neutral zone is just 20 minutes away, but Spock notes that there is a comet in their path, and passing through the comet's tail should make them visible momentarily, so Kirk orders battle stations. Now, on the Romulan ship, the Romulan commander plans to spring a trap on the Enterprise by turning on them abruptly to attack, but the Enterprise disappears from their sensor screen, and the commander realizes he's the one who's fallen into a trap. The Enterprise then fires blindly, hoping to destroy the Romulan ship. Then it appears and fires on the Enterprise. The Enterprise comes about and flies away, gaining sufficient distance that the weapon, when it eventually detonates, fails to destroy them. Kirk then orders the Enterprise to attack while the Romulans are still on the Federation side of the neutral zone. The Romulan commander then orders that debris be jettisoned to trick Kirk into thinking they've been destroyed and coming to a stop so that the Enterprise can no longer track them. But Kirk isn't fooled, and he brings the Enterprise to a halt as well to wait the Romulans out. Now, after nearly 10 hours of waiting, Kirk is in his quarters when McCoy comes to see him. Kirk laments that he's the one that has to make these decisions and how the burden of command weighs heavily on him. He asks McCoy, "Why me? And what if I'm wrong?" The scene's very reminiscent of that scene in the cage between Pike and Dr. Boyce, where Pike agonizes over the crewman he's lost and the burden of command, and how he's really just kind of tired of commanding a starship and would just like to live a peaceful life. Then we get one of McCoy's best scenes in the series as he gives that short speech to Kirk that ends with, "Don't destroy the one named Kirk." Back on the bridge, Spock accidentally activates the sensors, giving away their position, and the Romulans move to attack. Guessing the Romulans' next move, Kirk has the Enterprise again fire blindly. The Romulan commander orders that more debris be released to distract the Enterprise, with a nuclear warhead released as well. The Enterprise detects the bomb and they destroy it, but as a result, only one phaser bank is still functional, and Tomlinson is in the phaser room, control room alone, so Kirk sends Styles to assist him. Now, Kirk also orders the Enterprise to play dead in space, hoping to draw the Romulan ship back to the Federation side of the neutral zone, again playing a waiting game, hoping that the Romulan ship will make the first move. Later, Spock goes to the phaser control room and to check on the status of the phasers, and Styles basically tells Spock to go F himself. And Spock leaves, but then they notice that the phaser coolant is leaking. The Romulan ship is, or no, the Romulan ship appears, and Kirk orders a phaser attack. But there is no response. Kirk hears Spock ordering Styles to fire, and he returns to the room to find Styles and Tomlinson both incapacitated by the leaking coolant. And Spock fires the phasers himself. The Romulan ship is left helpless by the phaser attack, and Kirk tells the Romulan commander to prepare to abandon his ship. But the Romulan says that his people are creatures of duty and he will not leave his ship, and then gives the famous line, "You and I are of a kind. In a different reality, I could have called you friend." and then he destroys his ship and himself with it. Afterward, Kirk goes to sickbay, where Styles tells Kirk that Spock saved his life, with Spock noting that he only saved a trained officer so that Styles could return to duty. Kirk asks if there were any other casualties, and McCoy says that the only other death was Tomlinson. Kirk goes to the chapel, where Martine is mourning Tomlinson, and she tells him that she's all right. And Kirk's like, "What about me? I'm not all right." and and the episode ends there. Directed by Vincent McAvity, written by Paul Schneider. Of course, Mark Leonard played the Romulan commander. Paul Comia Stiles and Lawrence Montaigne played Decius, one of the crewmen. And of course, Lawrence Montaigne would return to Star Trek. He will appear in a mock time as well, playing Stawn. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look at These Are the Voyages. So this is from an NBC press release issued on November 22nd, 1966. The U.S. Enterprise embarks on a fateful seek and destroy mission following a series of unprovoked attacks by the marauding flagship of an enemy power in Balance of Terror. William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy co-star. Captain Kirk engages the hostile spacecraft in a furious mid-space battle, but is forced to take quarter when the equally powerful enemy, although suffering serious losses itself, inflicts heavy damage and injuries on the Enterprise. With most of their power and weaponry gone, Kirk and his wily adversary become locked in a suspenseful battle of wits as they maneuver for advantage. Mark Leonard portrays the commander of the enemy craft. Then Cushman writes, complicating the matter for Kirk is that the Romulans have an uncanny resemblance to Vulcans. The captain must now deal with issues of prejudice when one of his officers, Navigator Stiles, suspects the half-human Spock of having divided loyalties. The theme involves an examination of bigotry and how easily it spreads when one's enemy is different in appearance. Is it man against man or man against himself? Try both. Balance of Terror offers thought-provoking entertainment and two milestones for the series. This is our introduction to the Romulans, one of two recurring opponents of the Earth-led Federation. This is also the first episode to deal directly with the issue of racial bigotry. In doing so, we learn more about Spock's background. Spock himself shares this information, saying, quote, if Romulans are an offshoot of my enemy blood, and I think this likely, then attack is even more imperative. Vulcan, like Earth, had its aggressive colonizing period, savage even by Earth standards. If the Romulans retained this martial philosophy, then weakness is something we dare not show. This episode provides a strong reminder of Roddenberry's inspiration for Kirk's character. Robert Justman said, quote, Captain Kirk was Hamlet, the flawed hero. Gene told me that early on, and he modeled him on Captain Horatio Hornblower, and he had characteristics of Hamlet who knows what he has to do but agonizes over it. Feels, as Hornblower did, that he had to put on a brave front for the sake of his crew. He wasn't strong enough, and yet he has to be strong enough, otherwise they would have no one to protect them. In a very subtle and effective way, Balance of Terror accomplished Roddenberry's aspiration to be the 1960s equivalent to Jonathan Swift and to make commentary on current events through the actions of characters far in the future. One of the hottest disputes in 1966 involved the demilitarized zone dividing North and South Vietnam. The troops of North Vietnam continued to pour across the DMZ into the south, carrying out military strikes, testing American defenses, then retreating to the safety of home. The actions of the Romulans in Balance of Terror were clearly designed to mimic the tactics of the Viet Cong of this era. The episode is marred by one notable flaw. The Romulans speak English even amongst themselves. NBC was not likely to agree to subtitles, nor was there time or money to devise an alien language for them to speak. Okay, now this episode, again written by Paul Schneider. Schneider got his start writing Mr. Magoo cartoons. By 1966, he had numerous TV credits, such as multiple episodes of Bonanza and Barbara Eden's first series, How to Marry a Millionaire. Roddenberry had hired Schneider to write a script for The Lieutenant. But science fiction was new terrain for the writer. It should come as a little surprise then that Schneider's first Star Trek was a reworking of a non-science fiction property. Balance of Terror is based on the 1957 movie The Enemy Below, in which the captain of an American destroyer, played by Robert Mitchum, pursues an elusive German submarine with its skipper, played by Kurt Jurgens. In that story, as the action alternates between the American ship and the U-boat, we get to know and respect both the captains, who are very equally matched and engage in a deadly game of chess, and we see the strain a prolonged encounter can take on the crew. And I would point out that Kurt Jurgens was also, he played Stromberg, the villain in the James Bond film, The Spy Who Loved Me, as well. Roddenberry later said, "We had touched on that in the Corbomite maneuver, the conflicts that come from men confined together and in prolonged danger, as in submarine warfare. Then we added in the racial mistrust. The character elements came together without too much trouble. The problem was doing a war story on a TV budget." Let's see. Justman said, "Gene rewrote everything, but the original writers got credit." Because like this, with this episode, as well as most episodes, Gene Roddenberry took the script the writer had made and did a lot of rewriting on it and tinkering. Schneider appreciated the writer's credit, but said, quote, "It's painful to watch my stuff on TV. About the only thing I recognize is my name." One of the many changes Roddenberry made was with the dialogue Schneider wrote for that Kirk McCoy scene. As written, it was too obvious, with Kirk saying, quote, "I'm a starship captain. This is a decision for diplomats, not one man. How can I decide if we're risking starting a war, risking millions of lives?" Roddenberry preferred the less direct approach, having Kirk tell McCoy, quote, "I wish I was on a long sea voyage somewhere. Not too much deck tennis, no frantic dancing, and no responsibilities." Then after a pause, he asks, "Why me, Bones?" The writer the director, Vincent McAvity's resume included multiple episodes of Rawhide, Branded, and Gunsmoke. For the latter, he directed a whopping 45 episodes between 65 and 75. In 1959, he won the DGA, Directors Guild of America Award, for his direction of The Scarface Mob, which was the pilot episode for The Untouchables. Roddenberry knew McAvity well, as he directed 5 episodes of The Lieutenant. Regarding the preparation McAvity was given for his strange new series, which hadn't even hit the air yet, he said, "They showed me the pilot, and I had a little advantage of seeing the sketches and some additional film they'd already shot with the miniature of the ship and some effects that they had. They talked about it being like The Enemy Below while they were developing it, so that gave me a clear idea as how to approach. Other than technical aspects, the bridge of the spaceship and one on a destroyer were not that different, any more than the enemy vessel and a submarine were that different. And racial bigotry is the same, whether it's a white military man, say in Vietnam, not trusting a colleague of Asian descent, or an American man not trusting a shipmate with pointed ears. It's the human aspects of the stories that we relate to." Paul Comey, a prominent guest performer in this episode, considered McAvity to be a very underrated director, adding, quote, "He doesn't give you a whole lot of direction because he believes in you. He helps you find your own town and gives you the confidence to find the answers within you." Comey, who was cast as Navigator Styles, was 39 at the time. He worked often in TV with multiple appearances on series such as The Wild Wild West, Virginian, 12 O'Clock High, and The Twilight Zone. For the latter, he appeared in the episode People Are All Alike, starring alongside Susan Oliver, who played Vina in The Cage. Prior to Star Trek, prior to Star Trek, he played Deputy Johnny Evans for one season on the Western Two Faces West. And he had previously worked twice with Gene Roddenberry. Vincent McAveety was the one who called me for that role, Comey said. He had been an assistant director on an Untouchables episode I was in. Then he directed me in an episode of The Lieutenant. He also cast me in a half-hour pilot that Roddenberry had written, a police story. As a, I can't say the word. I don't think I should say the word here on YouTube, but it starts with R and ends with tard. Let's say, he said, I starred as a somewhat, you know, our kid in a red cap who was working on the roof of a building and was mistaken for a shooter who also wore a red cap. McAveety also directed Comey in several episodes of Rawhide, where the actor had a recurring role as a cowboy named Yo-Yo. And the director knew that Comey had great range as a performer. Quote, it was McAveety who contacted my agent about doing Star Trek, but Roddenberry didn't think I would be right because he'd seen me play the R-Tard kid. He said, quote, I don't think he's strong enough to play Styles. And McAveety said, you don't know Paul. So they arranged for me to meet Roddenberry, and he was a really lovely man. He was fantastic. We talked about writing because I had written a sort of comedy superhero script with a friend of mine from college. Roddenberry read it and told me he had never laughed so hard in his life, and that's how I got the job. Huh, that's interesting. Mark Leonard was 41 when he stepped into Star Trek to play the Romulan commander. Beginning in television in 1959 as a cast member in a pair of daytime soaps, Search for Tomorrow followed by Another World, he soon moved into primetime for guest spots on numerous series, often as villains. McAveety said, quote, I liked Mark. He's a classic kind of heavy. He could do anything, I think, any kind of major heavy role, Shakespeare or anything like that. I think he was excellent for that part. This would be the first of many Star Treks for Leonard, even though the character he plays meets with a tragic but honorable end. He would next appear as Sarek in the classic episode Journey to Babel. Lawrence Montaigne, who played the Romulan Decius, was 35. He worked often in front of the character in character parts and in much bigger parts than seen here. He was POW Hayes, in charge of diversions in The Great Escape. And on TV series, he was featured well in episodes of Dr. Kildare, The FBI, and The Fugitive. He also appeared in Cold Hands, Warm Heart, an episode of The Outer Limits that also starred William Shatner and future Star Trek guest player Malachi Throne. Quote, when I went in for auditions with Roddenberry, I actually read for the part of the commander, Montaigne recalled. When I got home, my agent called and said, you didn't get the part, but they want you to play Decius. Well, who the hell was Decius? He says, my agent told me he's the bad guy or something, but Mark Leonard is cast as the commander. Well, Mark and I had just finished a show together, and I thought it would be a lot of fun to work with Mark again because he's a great guy. So that's why I took a smaller role because of Mark Leonard. And Montaigne would return to Star Trek again wearing pointed ears for the second season episode Amok Time. Stephen Mines played the role of Tomlinson, the weapons officer whose marriage is interrupted by the Romulan attack on the Earth outpost. He was a regular in a pair of daytime soaps right before this, both Paradise Bay and Days of Our Lives, and would return to soaps on As the World Turns immediately after. Barbara Baldwin, the bride-to-be, would do better than her intended groom. She lived through the battle and would return to Star Trek in Shore Leave and in Turnabout Intruder. In real life, Baldwin, who she was married to Joe Agosta, Star Trek's head of casting. That's convenient. DaGosta said, quote, I never used my position to force her on anybody. In fact, just the opposite. I always resisted casting Barbara, but all of my producer and director friends, including Gene and Bruce Geller, always encouraged me to hire her. All of these producers and directors seem to have wives who are a little on the straight side, kind of just upright types. Barbara was more playful and sexy and fun. She was a guy's gal, so I'd make suggestions for parts, and they'd say, "What about Barbara?" And I'd say, "Look, are you sure you want me to do this?" And they'd say, "No, no, just go ahead and get Barbara." She's actually held that against me to this day, saying, "You always resisted hiring me." And that's true, I suppose. I was, or it was always my producer friends who got her the jobs. In fact, Gene Roddenberry had a little crush on her, just like mine was Sherry Jackson, who would appear in What Are Little Girls Made Of? Sean Morgan, who is seen here as one of the crew members in the phaser control room, made his first of 5 appearances on Star Trek. He remembered Joe Agosta and his wife Barbara were all college mates together. I'd done a bunch of stage work with them, as Joe had, so he cast me in several shows he was working on, and Star Trek was just a natural thing to go in on. John Warburton was 66 when he played the Romulan Centurion. His film and TV career spanned from 1932 through 1978, including the hits King Rat, Funny Girl, and Charlie Chan's Greatest Case. On TV, he appeared 18 times on Fireside Theater and dropped in 8 times on the series Judge Roy Bean. The same year as his appearance on Star Trek, he was featured prominently in the Wild Wild West episode The Night of the Great Brain. Gary Wahlberg played the doomed officer on Outpost 4. The prolific actor had hundreds of TV and film credits spanning the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, surrounding the filming of the episode of Star Trek from 1965 through 1968. He was a regular on the primetime soap Peyton Place as Edward Goddard, and then from 1970 through 74, he played Speed, one of Oscar and Felix's poker-playing buddies on The Odd Couple. And from 1976 through 1983, he appeared in 145 episodes of Quincy as Lieutenant Frank Monahan. McCoy continued to be well utilized by the writers. This was his 7th appearance in the series. At this point, his initial contract had been fulfilled. The next script to come down had already been circulated to cast and crew, and McCoy was not in it. DeForest Kelley, whose wife had said that 7 episodes should pay their mortgage for the year, had no way of knowing if there would be any more episodes for McCoy after this. They would soon find there was no cause to worry. Yeah, I should say so. Okay, so when this episode premiered on Thursday, December 15th, it got a 28% audience share, putting it second behind The Dating Game, which got 33.3%, and behind or ahead of My Three Sons, which was third at 27.2. The Dating Game, having replaced the Tammy Grimes show on ABC, was proving to be a primetime hit, although its ratings wouldn't last for long. Star Trek's excellent Balance of Terror had to settle for second spot, a half a ratings point above the CBS staple My Three Sons in the 8:30 to 9 o'clock slot. At 9 p.m., ABC's top show Bewitched took the lead, and CBS had the television premiere of the 1964 hit drama Baby, the Rain Must Fall, starring Steve McQueen. This dropped Star Trek to third place. However, it did fare better when it was aired in the summer on a rerun, as it would come in second behind the Thursday night movie. Vincent McAveety credited the success of Balance of Terror to strong characterizations, particularly Kirk and the Romulan commander. He said there were very heroic characters pitted against one another, and it dealt with the link to which people would go for their honor. It was a morality play and terribly gripping. DC Fontana felt this was one of Star Trek's very best episodes, and Roddenberry placed it among his top 10. And I'd say it's a top 10 episode too. I'd definitely give it a grade of A plus. John D.F. Black said, quote, Paul Schneider was a sweet man and I liked his work. He was the father of the Romulans, not Gene, not me or anyone else, but Paul Schneider. And when he came up with the Romulan characters, they were so wonderful. I mean, they were full, and I liked that script a lot. Script a lot. Stephen Mines, who played Tomlinson, said after dying in his first and only Star Trek, said, "quote When my son saw that episode, he said." What was Spock thinking? Why did he save that one jerk and leave you to die? Couldn't he have grabbed each of you? And Lawrence Montaigne said, quote, I hadn't really been watching it. My mother called one night and said, Hey, you're on television. Well, I'll watch Mark Leonard read the phone book, so I switched it on. I was very pleased. I wasn't sure what Star Trek was all about, but I remember it being enjoyable. And I thought I did an adequate job, but what I really liked was the interplay between me and Mark. Mark Leonard said, quote, the Romulan commander was one of the best roles I ever had. At conventions, I used to say that the role of Spock's father was the one I preferred because a big cheer would go up when I said that. I think it was because Sarek was part of the family. In many ways, I did enjoy that role, but I think the more demanding role and the better acting role was the Romulan commander. That's interesting. Gene Roddenberry said that one worked very well. Mark Leonard did well, showing the different layers to that character. A man much like Kirk, but serving on the other side. The hardest thing about war is you're fighting for what you believe, fighting for your country, but so is the other guy, and one of you doesn't go home. Paul Comey in 1990 recalled that I was teaching a class in acting at the University of Southern California recently, and I was approached by a young man who told me how much he enjoyed my character on Star Trek. I mean, this kid could barely have even been born when Balance of Terror was made. That really amazes me. Peter Sloman, who covered this episode for DeForest Research, said, quote, I liked Balance of Terror. I thought it was extremely well done. It was a ripoff of The Enemy Below, that classic thing where you got two guys trying to outwit one another, but I think that one works really well. And Paul Schneider's final word, Bounce of Terror holds up remarkably well, and Vince McAveety in 2011 said that was another one of my favorites. Wonderful writing. I like that show a lot. All right. Well, that's all Mark Cushman has to say about it. So I guess I will go ahead and wrap it up there. I want to thank those who tuned in during the stream and those who will tune in on a rewatch. If you haven't, please do like this stream and sub to the channel if you would while you're here, and maybe check out some of my other videos. And Trek Talk will be back next week when I'll take a look at the episode, What Are Little Girls Made Of? So until then, have a good night, and I'll see you all next week.